This is the Anthrobiology Podcast, hosted by me, Gabby LaPera. Every 2 weeks, I interview a biological anthropologist about what makes us, us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. Joining me here today, I have Dr. Habiba Chirchir of Ohio State University. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. I'm really excited to have you on. This year, we've had a little bit of a theme of talking about robusticity and gracility, and we've mostly talked about robusticity in anatomically modern humans, like people who've been around in the last few hundred years. So I'm really excited to talk about gracility with you, which is the main focus, your main area of focus in your lab. Before I blather on way too long, can you explain what gracility is?
Yeah, so gracility refers to the fact that we can measure how light or how dense our bones are. And when we are talking about gracility, we're referring to, the lightness of bone rather than how dense it is or how thick it is. And this is something that you can do in different ways by measuring bone density itself or by measuring what's called cross-sectional bone geometry, in which you can get data about the strength of bone. And so you can have a classification of, these bones appear more light, while these bones appear more, seem to be more dense or more stronger, so to speak.
Yeah, so it's not just like looking at the bone and being like, well, looks gracile to me. You have strong pieces of measurement.
Right. So there's ways to measure it, but you can also look at bones, right, comparatively and eyeball them. Mm-hmm. And you can notice that some bones will be a little bit more robust, others will appear more gracile. For example, if you think about Neanderthals compared to modern humans, you can eyeball that. But then again, you can go deep in depth and actually take measurements to quantify that.
Yeah, you can have like the subjective measure. If you were to look at a bone, what are some markers of gracility versus robusticity? So for example, I think one of the most common ones that we talk about, the one that's most easily felt in humans, if you have a man near you and you are a woman or vice versa, you can feel each other's brow ridges. Men tend to have much more robust brow ridges. They're bumpy, they're big, and women tend to have much smoother foreheads right around your eyebrows. I'm just sitting here touching my eyebrows, which I guess none of you can see. But so are there other examples of that where it's kind of easy, more visible for people to see?
Yeah. So one of the ones I like to tell students often is that if you touch what's called the mastoid process, just behind at the back of your ears, you'll feel a bony protrusion, and that's usually a location in which muscles attach. And you also see that distinction that you're talking about, that would be more robust or more rugose, really, in male individuals compared to female individuals. But of course, again, when we're talking about sexual dimorphism, this is a continuum, right?
Right.
There's also a lot of variation amongst sexes. So it's not a standard, but it's patterns that you can see.
That's definitely a really good reminder. I think another way to go about understanding visual differences in gracility and robusticity is to Google a comparison of a Neanderthal skull and a human skull. And you'll see very, very apparent differences.
Yeah, and because I'm most interested in postcrania, that is the long bones, if you Google a picture of a Neanderthal femur, for example, compared to a modern human one, you'll see that distinction, that the Neanderthal one appears, just bigger, more larger, more rugose, probably more muscle markings. And then the human one is a little bit gracile or lighter.
Yeah. So one of the interests of your lab is understanding how gracility came about. So to me, that implies that perhaps we were not as gracile in the past. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes, it's a big question. The big question is the when did we become gracile and the why. The when, we kind of have an understanding of it, although, of course, there's still a lot of questions that we can pursue to better understand this. But essentially, if you look at our ancestors, say from before 2 million years, you see them they having robust faces, also robust limbs. Even if they're smaller, they seem to have really high bone density. But then when we get to 2 million years, the thinking is that there's a lot of change, or 2.5 million thereabouts. There's a shift from more, for lack of a better word, more ape-like morphology or more robust morphology to a more gracile morphology, which is more human-like. You have taller bodies, you have longer limbs, you have somewhat narrow pelvises or hips. So all this suite of traits that we consider to be human-like are appearing with the genus Homo specifically. They are what we see in African Homo erectus. Now, when we look, so there is gracilization, but when we investigate further, and what we do in my lab is look at bone density, the gracilization levels by measuring bone density in the ends of long bones, so in joints. The pattern doesn't seem to quite hold. So you don't see gracile morphology at very early, at 2 million years. It seems to be something that's emerging way, way later when we have already adapted agriculture. We're already living in a human, in almost what we call modern day settlements. But comparatively, those early Homo from about 2 million years compared to other species of, that lived around the same time of Australopithecines, others that we're not sure which species they belong to, they appear to show robusticity. But then when you look at early Homo, they seem to have slight gracilization, but not significantly. Then you get to 10,000 years, what I'm talking about, when we have agriculture around, we've started domesticating plants, crops, domesticating animals, is when you see these really low bone density skeletons. That is what I'm referring to as light skeletons or gracile morphology. So the when seems to be really, it's happening very late. Okay. The why is a different a bigger question altogether. So I don't know if you want us to continue on that trajectory.
Wait, I do want to ask a couple of clarifying questions because I'm not sure people have a timeline for human hominin evolution. So when we're talking about 2 million years ago, who are we talking about?
So at 2 million, there are multiple species on the landscape, but the one that we see it, proliferating is our genus Homo. So we have African Homo erectus in the landscape in Africa. Then soon after, you have Homo erectus in Asia, in Georgia, in Dmanisi. You also have Homo habilis in Africa around this time, about 2 million years. You also have the Paranthropus genus, which is its own, genus, a group of hominins that's very unique in their morphology. And then you also have some Australopithecines still on the landscape. So you have multiple genera. But what you see, that's the shift that you're seeing, is that body morphology that's appearing, that's more human-like, that belongs to Homo.
Yeah, and I think this is really interesting too, because the shift that you're talking about, the gracilization happening around 10,000 years, Homo sapiens have been around for a while at that point.
Yes, Homo sapiens, by that time, we probably appeared on the landscape, emerged about 250, 300,000 years thereabouts. But then if you look at their morphology, their bones, they're still robust compared to modern humans of 10,000 years ago. So that's the fascinating thing, because, you think, oh, well, this is a modern, it's anatomically modern pattern, but it quite isn't. So those early modern humans are slightly a bit gracile, but they're not that gracile. They're not as gracile as present day humans.
And is there a difference between present day humans? Because it's when you're an anthropologist, 10,000 years is also present day. But is there a difference between modern, current, walking around right now humans and 10,000 years ago?
So the data we have, the data I have specifically are from the earliest humans I've looked at, or rather from the Holocene, from the last 10,000 years, are from about 5,000 years ago. And they show the same pattern of gracility as humans of 800 AD. So all of these are from the archaeological record. So the pattern seems to be the same, but there's other evidence from cross-sectional geometry that shows variations depending on what they're doing. So if you're, humans from 5,000 years ago, probably hunting and gathering more compared to humans of, 2,000 years later, there's differences depending on what they're doing.
Yeah. And listeners, this is something that we've touched on, which is that physical activity patterns can affect your bones and it can affect your bone density. I know I've talked about this in the past, but just in case you're new, this is like one of the reasons they tell little old ladies to lift weights, for example, because it helps build bone density. One of the things that your bones do, bones aren't static. They model and remodel in response to physical activity. And the way that happens is your muscles actually attach into your bones. And then when you move them, the way that your body is moving around is by your bones actually leveraging your skeleton, which is pretty cool. And it pulls on them and they build up, and then you get like more density, more bone. But it's also a use it or lose it situation, right? So if you aren't moving around that much, if you're not doing a lot of physical activity, your bones become less dense. They become more gracile, actually.
Yeah, right.
I'm ready to teach a college class. Just kidding, I'm not.
You are.
Students of Dr. Chirchir, I hope you heard that. I'm coming to your classroom tomorrow. So one of the really cool things I want to go back to one of the other things you said, which is we understand about when this happened. One of the other things that you study is the why. What do you think?
Yes. So for a long time, so the work that I do, of course, is a continuation of what others have done for many years. And a lot of that work has been on cross-sectional geometry. And you have people that have studied this and looked at different patterns of robusticity versus gracilization in long bones. And what came out is that physical activity is what's driving these gracile morphologies. So, for example, if you're a hunter-gatherer and you're walking long distances, right? Consequently, your lower limb will be more robust compared to someone that's more sedentary. Maybe it's someone that's not walking long distances, maybe someone that's farming, or someone that's sitting in an office in an industrial society. My research looking at the gracilization of trabecular bone, of the bone density itself, seems to also follows this pattern of previous work, that you see these variations depending on what people are doing. So the main conclusion is that activity is playing a key role. But because regardless of which group we look at, right, which human group is doing what, or what their subsistence strategy is, all of them seem to be more gracile compared to our ancestors of even just about 11,000 years ago. So this has made me wonder if it's just that activity is the only reason, or is there a bigger shift, evolutionary shift, that we haven't considered before? In my thinking, is that perhaps this idea of hypothesis that's been proposed that's called human self-domestication might have an effect on that. And I'll back up a little bit and give you the explanation behind that. Essentially, the self-domestication hypothesis posits that there was a selection for intergroup cooperation. So you are working together so that you can succeed as a group, right? That selection for that intergroup cooperation, which you actually see in the fossil record, in the Paleolithic, you see people living together, they became successful against the Neanderthals, for example, right? So that selection for this behavior inadvertently led to changes in morphology, okay? And while this may sound, oh, how would this happen? It's because we also have evidence in other animals that have self-domesticated, that their morphology changed, possibly as a consequence of a selection for a specific kind of behavior. So if you think about dogs, right, that we consider to have self-domesticated, you see a change in morphology from the wolf to the dog, in which the dog is slightly more gracile, it has smaller teeth, you have a reduction in a slight reduction in cranial capacity, and so on, and many other traits that one can get into. But of course, keeping in mind that, of course, there's also a lot of variation among domestic dogs because of what we've done in the last years or 400
I was just laughing at the idea of like a slight reduction as my Chihuahua dachshund sleeps behind me.
Yes. Well, yes, there's so much variation among breeds.
Right, of course.
Yeah, but even if you look, for example, compare the dingo, for example, or say what dogs that you find in Africa that are probably you might consider the more basal dogs, there's definitely a shift in that morphology. So that's the basis of that, thinking about that gracile morphology coming about as a result of a selection for a behavior that wasn't, you're not thinking about. And we kind of know the pathway. We actually know the pathway in which this happens, in that you have in domesticated animals, including those that self-domesticated, like the dogs, you see that the difference between them and their wild ancestors is that during early embryonic development, there's a group of cells known as neural crest cells that migrate and concentrate in a different pattern. And those cells ultimately have an effect on the morphology that we see in the domesticates. For example, I'll give you an example of dogs, how they have curly tails, or some of them have droopy ears, right? Those cells have an effect on those particular morphological traits that we would consider domesticated traits. Okay, so we understand the pathway or the mechanism in which morphology changes based on a selection for tameness or friendliness, if you will. For the postcranial bones, though, we don't know the mechanism exactly. So this is still early days of this research, but I'm really excited about seeing what, establishing the patterns of gracile morphology in humans, and then as well as in comparative taxa, like the dogs and cats and other animals that you would think were self-domesticated.
Yeah, this the study of domestication is really interesting. If you want like a good place to start, and of course the name escapes me because it's too early in the morning, but there's a Russian scientist who is pretty famous for working on domesticating foxes, and the changes that you see in the foxes over a fairly short number of generations are super interesting, and they're exactly what you described. But like they start having floppier ears and bigger eyes, and like coat patterns that are kind of spotty, and like all of these things. It's super interesting. It's like one of those things where like it's kind of like a can of Pringles. You open the top and you're just going to have one. And then like all of a sudden you're at the bottom of the thing and you're like, I want more Pringles. That's what domestication research is like.
Yeah, it's fascinating in that way. But of course, domestication also in itself there's such different pathways of domestication that it complicates things, because you have the self-domestication pathway versus, if you're selecting an animal for a big body to give you more meat or to give you milk, so the pathways are slightly different. But overall, I think focusing or understanding the patterns of how morphology changes in self-domesticates as well as in other animals that have been domesticated is the starting point for this kind of trying to answer this question of why gracile morphology.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually going to ask you, I was reading, I was refreshing my memory of your articles last night, and I saw that you had quite a few articles where you were comparing felid and canid, so cat and dog, but like the whole the whole range of them, not just like the ones that live in your house. You were comparing the bone density across animals that lived in very different environments. I was actually curious, can you talk a little bit about how you get access to that kind of bone research?
Yes, yeah, no. It's from museum collections primarily. So I've been going to museums requesting for lawn specimens, and they've been really gracious about this, and then taking them to a facility where I can scan them. More recently, it's just been here at Ohio State. And then quantifying, taking the images that are resulting from the scans, and then quantifying how much bone there is, and doing the comparisons that way. So that study, specifically the one for the cats, the idea was to compare, to think or to ask the question, how does limiting mobility change bone? So if you have an animal living in a zoo and its counterpart living in the wild, how gracile are they, or how does their bone density compare? And we saw the effect. We found the effect of confinement in zoos resulted in more gracile morphology. So that was really great, like a starting point to understand the effect of activity. But even with that, there's more questions. Is it an animal that's been brought in from the wild, or is it an animal that's been born in captivity? So those are next steps.
Do you have access to that kind of data? Like, do the museums know where, like, origins of the animals, or is it like you kind of have to guess?
Yeah, some of them they do. So, for example, the ones in museum collections usually are from, like, the Smithsonian. They're from early 1900s through 1950s. The same thing with the American Museum of Natural History. So some that came from the ones that came from the wild, actually, the collections from the wild are well documented, right? Because people were going on explorations to foreign countries during those colonial times and bringing in these collections. But some that came from zoos are also well documented, or rather, the ones that were born in zoos are better documented. The animals that were brought from the wild into the zoos, I haven't found any that I could say, we know this is well documented that it came from the wild and lived in the zoo. So the records aren't that great, but you'll get pieces here and there. But of course, what we can do now is really just work with modern day zoos where they have better records and look at modern day living animals. And that's something that I'm hoping we'll be able to do in the next coming years, is say, go to the Columbus Zoo, get the records, because they take the animals a lot of the animals now are born in captivity, right? And they take the animals to the vet at certain intervals. They have data, physiological data, morphological data. They have, very detailed records of this. And we can look at that over the long term, hopefully, to better understand this and then compare them to the ones in the wild. So lots of work to do ahead.
Do you think you're going to end up doing one of those Barack style experiments where, do you remember the one with the sheep that he has like trotting on an incline?
Oh, yes, of course. That was a Harvard study. Yes. That was cool. Well, that would be cool, actually.
Can you do that with tigers?
I don't know if I can, if I have the do it to work with animals and put them in high heels. I don't know if I can do it.
Listener, this is a guy who he did like a series of really interesting studies on sheep where he had them doing all sorts of things like trotting on an incline for a while, trotting on flat ground, and seeing differences in like their bone density and morphology. He also was he the heels guy too?
Yeah. From the same group. It was fascinating. I reference those papers a lot in my work because it's a very good indication of how activity changes patterns of bone, right? How the trabecular bone, which is very responsive to activity, changes its orientation. So it's really very interesting.
I'll link that in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can just look at those. It's super interesting stuff. I still remember the first time I read those papers and I was like, how did he do
And I think what would even be more fascinating if someone had wanted to do this is to do it in humans, right? I mean, it might take a bit of time to get the approvals But to look at people that wear high heels and quantify how that changes their bone morphology, what's the effect on their calcaneus and their...
Yeah, because it has to. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's the idea. I think part of the idea for those sheep studies was to look at that and probably have implications for...
Right. Yes.
That's my assumption, that there was a thinking around
it wasn't just to see. No, no, totally. I just like hadn't really thought about like, I sometimes like the disconnect between like we are studying this in animals and then like thinking about like how it affects humans. And then I still remember, I think one of my first memories as a kid of the idea of like being able to change your body in kind of long lasting ways was this segment. I want to say it was like on 2020 about women who were cutting off toes so that they would better fit into high heels. And then also...
You mean like it's an old culture. I remember reading about this a little bit. Is that the one in which you bind the foot?
Oh, that's in China. That's like a traditional foot binding. No, this isn't like modern women who their feet didn't fit in their shoes. And so they would do plastic surgery to like modify their feet so they would better fit into high heels. And then, of course, you have people who were kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum who were wearing high heels for a really long time and had like hammer toes and like the bones in your foot can change quite a bit because of... And I remember being like 6 or 7 and just being like horrified at the things that you could do to your feet.
Right. Yeah. No, just speaking to how plastic bone is.
Yeah, it's crazy. Human bodies are amazing. That was a wild tangent about sheep and high heels.
Yeah, going back, I was just going to say, you mentioned the Russian study and you were saying you forgot about the name and you're going to link to it. That study is about Belyev's. The original researcher was Dmitry Balyev. And then the follow-up studies were by his student, Ludmila Trut, Trut, if any. Or if you just search in your search engine, you look for Silver Fox study in Russia, you should be able to get it.
Yeah, it should pop right up. There's, the history of domestication, or the history of domestication research as well. The history of those researchers is also very interesting. I think that sometimes people get really focused on the science, rightfully so, because it's like what we're learning. But I think it's also sometimes worth looking into the researchers themselves who are doing the studies, because like it's if you like stories, these are very human stories that are happening, and it's very interesting. I feel like I'm just like teasing like what happened. A lot of the study was happening in the USSR, and like things were not great for these researchers. Like it's worth reading their story for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I also wanted to ask you about something that I just saw as a line on your website, but I didn't have time to dig into as deeply, which is that you do paleo field research at, is it Baringo?
Yes, in Baringo. Yeah. I do have a field site in Baringo, Kenya, in East Africa. And it is a site that's dated, we are working with sediments that are dated to about 4 million years to 2.6 million years. So quite a wide range of a time period. But within it's a very fascinating geology there, within a very confined geographic space, but with such great representation time-wise. And so we've been going there now. It's going to be our 3rd year. And we are prospecting, looking for fossils. And Baringo is a rich area for faunal remains. It has yielded some significant hominins, but not as many as some other sites in East Africa. So we have I think from previous research, there's been a Homo erectus cranium from that area. There are multiple monkey remains, skeletons that have been published. Then, of course, there's a famous Aurorintugenensis that also comes from that area, not too far from where we are prospecting. So hopefully maybe we'll find other Aurorin.
That would be really exciting.
Yeah. So that's exciting, actually, that we are able to go and look for fossils, and all fossils we get, even if they're not hominins, are still very valuable, right, to address questions about paleobiology. the paleo environment of that area, species abundance in that area, and so on. So,
do you also work with a zooarchaeologist, or you to identify the faunal remains, or how are you going about doing that?
Yeah, so we are still in the early stages, but we've just invited specialists in paleo faunal remains.
Yeah.
So not zooarchaeology, but zoo, paleo zoo.
Paleo zooarchaeologist, yeah.
Someone that studies fauna in the deep past that has a lot of experience in this. So yes, so he'll be helping us to identify them. So I'm very excited about that too.
That's really cool. So one thing I ask everyone who does field research is there anything that you always bring with you into the field that other people might not think about?
That's a good question. So, which makes me, I have to frame my field site first. So our site is actually not that remote. We are from the capital, which is Nairobi. We are maybe 5 hours away. And then from where we stay in a hotel, not tents.
So you'll be comfortable.
We are comfortable. So, and then we drive into the site for about an hour. So it's a little bit remote in that sense, but it's not that remote compared to some of the East African sites out there, like northern Kenya, could be or the west of Lake Turkana. So what to bring? I think it's just the basics. For comfort, we have most things because we're staying in a hotel. But shoes, and this I learned the hard way, because in this area there are these big, thick thorns that are coming from a shrub that we call locally, it's called ngoja kidogo, the thorn bushes, and those penetrate your sneakers, because I went with sneakers and what was I thinking? I need real study boots for this site. So yes, shoes was a key, was an awakening for me. And then of course, just proper covering clothes that protect you, and you don't have to, you can pass through these ngoja kidogos, these thorny bushes easily. So no, I'm not answering your question at all.
No, you're totally fine. It just reminded me, we have these like kind of thorny bushes in the Sierras in California, and I realized no one actually knows what they're called because my friend called them those damn bushes, and now everyone just calls them those damn bushes. I'm sure they have a real name.
I know. What you can do if you're out there is there's all these plant identification apps that you can use. You take a picture of the
we need to take a picture and then come down off the mountain and remember to look it up.
Oh, that's right. You've got to have Wi-Fi. So, well, thankfully, where we are, we have, not Wi-Fi, but we have the phone service. So you can use data on your phone. So we are lucky that, well, actually, it depends on where you are because it's hilly. So if you're down in the depressions, in the gullies, then there's not much. You can't do much on the phone, which is as well. And then when you come, you're on the upper surfaces, and then you can get service. Well, the GPS also, the GPS works wherever, but of course you have to have a GPS, otherwise you might get lost out there.
Yeah. Okay. So definitely sturdy shoes for you if you go out into the field. So I do want to be respectful of your time. I know you have another meeting after this, so I'm going to ask you the last 3 questions that I ask all my guests. The first is, if people wanted to learn more about either your research or like get a good introduction to the type of research you do, where would be a good place for them to start?
Ooh, that's a good question. And it depends on what it is, because the breadth of what we've talked about, really, I mean, it amounts to understanding gracilization, but there's a lot to it, right? There's the hominins, there's the modern humans from the archaeological record, there's the comparative animals, the dogs and cats and monkeys and apes. And then there's other people that do study this by looking at cross-sectional geometry, and then I study it by looking at bone density. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, but some foundational papers, but still, scientific papers that you would look into would be, not to talk about my work necessarily, but you can look at some of my work, but work by someone. work by someone that I really have learned a lot from is Dr. Chris Ruff. He's done a lot of studies on gracile morphology, and he has written some very, fantastic papers and done a lot of research, as well as, even some that are a little bit more accessible in terms of reading, that are not that, that are well, you can understand fairly well. And then, of course, what I also do, you can look at my papers. If you're interested in the self-domestication component, I would recommend papers by Brian Hare. Dr. Brian Hare is at Duke University. He's written extensively about this, and his focus is mostly on dogs, domestic dogs, and compared to wolves and others. So those, I think that's where I would start. But of course, if someone wants to chat about this with me, they can email me, and I would be happy to speak further.
Yeah, I can confirm you're very nice. Second question is, what are you reading for work right now?
What am I reading for work? That's I'm afraid to answer that question because I've been teaching a lot this semester and I haven't done much reading. But I'll tell you, I have a paper that I just requested and it arrived. And it is called The Rapid Evolution of Prehistoric Dogs from Wolves. So my mind is on domestication. And that's what I have for today, to read today, I hope.
I hope you get time to do it too.
Yeah. And then there's also been readings because I'm teaching a class on human origins. So we've been reading a lot about the earliest hominins, the evidence that we have for, say, Sahelanthropus chadensis to be considered the earliest hominin. And there's been some recent papers that came out publishing the postcrania of Sahelanthropus. So we've been reading that too in my class.
Yeah. I think at some point I really need to have another paleoanthropologist come on to talk about like a deep study on a particular set of remains, because I don't know that I've done that yet. I think the closest I got was Dr. Bernard Wood. I saw that you were at GW. He was my first interviewee ever.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Dr. Wood was served on my dissertation committee. So
yeah, it's anthropology is a small world. Yeah.
It is a small world.
Yeah. And the last question is, what are you consuming for fun? So this could be like a book, a TV show, kayaking, whatever it is.
Yeah, I've been watching. Well, I haven't gone out kayaking at all. I don't think I've never kayaked, to be honest. Maybe next time. I've been watching a show on PBS called Grantchester. And so whenever I have a little bit of downtime, which sometimes it's hardly ever there, but yes, I do watch Grantchester. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's an investigative detective type show from the 1950s England. Actually, it's set in Cambridge, University of Cambridge, and you have a detective and a vicar working together to investigate, murder cases.
Sorry, the reason I'm laughing is because why do the British have so many murder TV shows with specifically with religious figures doing investigation? Like, why are there so many? And they're all good. Don't get me wrong, but like, there has to be at least 4 or 5. That's a lot.
I know, probably more than. But anyway, they keep us entertained. So.
Yeah, I'll check it out. That's like exactly. I love to watch that while I'm crocheting. And sometimes I feel a little bit bad because I'll like be making a baby blanket and someone's just like being murdered.
And the good thing is, right? You might not even have to see this. Like I say, you're crocheting.
Yeah.
You can just listen.
Just look up every once in a while. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate having you on, and you're welcome back anytime.
Oh, thank you so much, Gabby. Yeah, I hope I answered some questions that would be, helpful to your listeners.
You definitely did.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope I see you at one of the AABAs.
Definitely.
Maybe not this year, but maybe next.
Definitely. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Anthrobiology Podcast. If you have questions or comments, you can reach me at gabby.lapera@anthrobiology.com. That's spelled GABY.LAPERA@anthrobiology.com. This show is produced by me. Music courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear at Sound of Picture.